It's good to hear what Rob and Sophie think about the strategy piece. Rob, do you want to go?
Yeah, so I broadly agree with James. Not much more to add to that. I think there's a couple of things we'll probably come on to which touch on this. One is, I think the classic in-house lawyer challenge, which is to be in the room at the right time and to get involved early enough. I don't think there's an in-house lawyer who doesn't or hasn't spent some time worrying about that. And when you solve that, you've indirectly solved your issue of reputation and brand within the business. So you solve that by letting them know how helpful you can be, and frankly, you sometimes have to push open doors and get yourself involved and not take it personally when you're not involved. But also there's an efficiency piece, which is you can go into any in-house role and they will find work for you to do. Someone who's bright, someone who's got great attention to detail, they'll find stuff for you to do, and you could spend days and weeks doing it and no one will thank you for it. You know, it's the whole what have you done for me recently? You can disappear, and so those are the two challenges, and it's finding that balance, I think.
Definitely. Sophie?
I think that's right, and I think you can't be everything to everyone, and I think sometimes the risk when you're an in-house lawyer and you like to be helpful and you want to be known for solving problems is that you then get that reputation and then people bring you all of their problems to solve, and that can be an issue for your own strategy and executing on your own goals. So I think you've got to have a really clear view of what you're trying to achieve as a team and what you want to be known for and what you want to be doing before you kind of push that out on the business, so that you can make sure you're balancing that when it kind of comes back to hit you.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely agree. So in terms of sort of what you can do practically to establish a good reputation, obviously we've sort of talked about being too helpful is a bit of a danger because you become a crutch and you kind of become a bit of a dumping ground for everything that is in writing, probably. But what sort of things can you do to establish that good reputation that you want to establish? Rob, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think you've got to work out first. There's a couple of things, tricks, I think, whether they're tricks or just experience or whatever, that you've got to realize. The first thing you've got to realize, I think, to establish a good brand and reputation is that what makes you credible within your team or within a group of lawyers is not what makes you credible within the management of the business. So there are so many different things that the executive team of your business, frankly, that's what matters, right? If you want to be GC in a business or you want to be a senior lawyer in a business, what matters is that your reputation with those people is strong. You've also got to help, everyone on the day-to-day business do their job, solve problems, make their lives easier. Those the skills that you need are not the same. So, for example, if you looked within your legal team or within junior members of the business, your attention to detail, your legal knowledge, your ability to collaborate, those are probably three of the main things that are of huge importance. But to build a brand with the management, they don't really care. They care, but they assume you're good at it. If you assume that everyone who's got to the executive team in a business thinks they're brilliant at hiring people, that they'll have that down as one of their skills. I'm good at picking good people. So if you're telling them how hard you work, how much you know, or how much of a great team player you are, you're kind of wasting your time because they'll assume all these things. You have to be good at them. But when you're in the room with those people, you're wasting your time. What you need to do is be able to communicate concisely, I think, and have, and be able to articulate business impact of the problems you've solved. I think those two things are things that I've learned possibly the hard way. I think I've got away with it largely, but if you're going into a board meeting or anything like that, you can't go in and reel off 10 minutes of your story. They don't care. It's got to be right. This is the problem. This is the solution, and this is the business impact. So yeah, working out how that works first, I think, is the trick.
Yeah, James.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree with all of that. I think it's also about being able to talk to company strategy and align what you're doing to the strategic goals of the business. So it's great that you're working on all these projects from a legal perspective, but you've got to be able to ladder that up to how that's actually impacting on the business goals. And sometimes that's really challenging, right? Because the stuff that goes on in the background that lawyers do doesn't necessarily always ladder up to a goal, but it still needs to get done, and it's still about managing risk. But if you want to be able to talk the language of the business and you want to talk to the executive team, you've got to be able to talk to the business goals, and perhaps let go of some of the things that you're also doing that you think is really, really important behind the scenes that perhaps those people won't be impressed by.
Yeah. Sophie?
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And I think also that there's kind of a level of authenticity you've got to think about as well. So it's all well and good to think about what your brand is, what you want your reputation to be, what your strategy is, but you then have to be able to live that out. So I think it's really important that at the core of that is kind of who you are and what your values are, and something that you're going to be able to do and just be, so that you're not spending your whole life thinking, oh, I wanted my personal brand to be this, and how am I going to frame this in a way that's going to match my, my reputation I'm trying to build. It has to kind of be something that, at its core is you, so that it's sustainable.
Yeah, definitely. So something else I wanted to talk about is how do you actually communicate with the business in terms of your personal brand, and how you sort of push stuff back to the business and empower them. We talked a lot about speaking to the board and speaking at that strategic level, but how much of your reputation is about doing different things for different people to establish that good reputation? For example, creating standard templates, etc., and allowing the business to self-serve as much as possible, so that they're empowered, so you're not having to deal with that, yet you're not being a blocker, and you're perceived to be being helpful. So it's this sort of multiple face that you've got to put on for different people. Sophie, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I think I think helping people to look good is always going to stand you in good stead. So when you're working with stakeholders who are trying to themselves present well to the executive, who are trying to achieve their own goals, that we have a big role to play in facilitating a lot of what they do, in thinking of problems and thinking of risks, and helping them to be prepared for them, manage them in advance. I think anyone who's kind of been through a situation where you've worked with the commercial team, thought about the things that might go wrong, and then been in a strong place when they did go wrong because of that, knows that delivers a lot of value. I think we have this really hard challenge of trying to be negative in a positive way, I think, as lawyers. So a lot of the people we work with are trying to solve something, are trying to do something, are trying to be proactive, and we're thinking about, what's the worst case scenario? How do I stop this situation happening? How do I maintain this in a kind of controlled environment, and all those things? But we need to do it in a way that everyone else thinks we're being constructive and helping them towards their goals, and actually we're being positive. And I think that's kind of a weird challenge. If you can get that balance right, I think you're on a pretty good track.
Great, yeah. Rob?
I agree. We're being boring, aren't we? We're agreeing with each other.
Well, it's going to be controversial.
I think that's right. I mean, we've kind of talked about how you can't have a single brand, right? If you have a junior commercial associate come to you with a problem and they didn't involve you soon enough, you don't ball them out, right? No one wins. They need your help. And that's probably the point where you use your experience and your problem-solving ability to say, right, let's sit down, let's work through it. As Sophie says, you make them look good. If you have a repeat problem where the chief risk officer of the business or the chief commercial officer of the business is not involving you soon enough, that's when you need a bit of backbone, and you need to start saying, look, we are making unsafe decisions because we don't have the proper decision-making process in. The way you have those two conversations are completely different, obviously. So your reputation depends on multiple brands. You have to wear many hats. I think, to kind of expand on Sophie's point, one thing that occurred to me here was, when we talk about this, it leads me on to hiring. Like, when you hire for your team, you've got to have, more important than any technical experience is someone who can do what I've just described, or what Sophie's just described. You have to be able to, you've got to hire people who can have those conversations, be able to talk to junior people without talking down to them, and be able to manage upwards. The old adage, isn't it? You've got to be able to have people who can talk up and make those people realize and they have authority more than any technical skill. That's the reputation of your team, because you can't do it all. Depends on having a team full of people who have those skills.
Yeah. James?
Yeah, and kind of building on that, really, I mean, it's about having a team that's networked across the business at all levels. Because depending on the size of the business, obviously, if you're in a smaller business, you may be connected to everybody in the business. But as the business grows, or larger businesses, you just can't possibly know everyone. You can't be across everything that's going on at any point in time. But if you've got a team of people that are well connected, they've got a network across the business, who are solving problems, that are seeing things that are going on that it's just not across your radar, is really, really important. But it, kind of coming back to your earlier point, it's not just about keeping management happy and talking to the board and talking in the language of the board. You've obviously, you're solving problems for everybody, right? And you've got, having a reputation means having a reputation as a team, and the function, and having a good reputation as a team as a function means everyone's talking good things about the team, whatever function they're in, whatever level of the organization they're in. You want positive things. You want to be seen as an enabler, not a blocker, as it says in the chat. You want to be seen someone that can solve solutions, get things done quickly, not slowing down the process. You are executing at pace, keeping up with the pace of the business, and thinking of things before they happen, like being proactive and delivering things, not necessarily when they're asked, but actually even when they're not asked. And all of that tooling, enabling the business to actually self-serve and good tools, that not just tools that work for the lawyers, but tools that are actually fit for purpose and that the business can use without coming back to the legal team. All of these things have a positive impact on the brand of the team and therefore the lawyers in that team.
Yeah, I think you've got to, it doesn't mean saying yes to everything, and a great way to be able to say no without pissing anyone off, frankly, is being able to say, no, I'm not going to help you with this anymore, but here's how you help yourself. This is some training, this is some learning. And those kind of like optimization techniques are very, very, very helpful. A classic example of that, I think, for most in-house teams will be commercial contract negotiation. You'll find that I have a very good commercial contracts lawyer in my team. Now, if she's on a deal, she's not going to switch off when they start talking about service levels because they're the technical part. She's not going to switch off when it talks about payment because that's the finance part. A lawyer who's working on a commercial contract will probably run the whole thing. Now, if you grow to a certain size, you're going to have a procurement function or somebody who in commercial finance who's looking at spend, and maybe you'll have someone in risk who's looking at supplier risk. At that point, you find that a junior lawyer could be roped into the risk element, and all of a sudden that's all they do. And it's probably not safe for the business to be relying on someone who's just very good at their job to be doing all those things. And at that point, you take a step back and you have a chat with someone and say, do you know we've got such and such? Now, for those on the call, he or she might be a 4 PQE lawyer, very bright, whatever, but they're making all commercial finance decisions. They're managing our supplier risk framework. They're kind of making on the fly. Is that how you want the business to be run? If so, fine, but I don't think it is. What I think you want is some structure around this. So let's help you. We can help you develop that. And they're not going to turn around and say, oh, Rob's trying to get his team to do less work. They're going to say, oh, wow, this person's thinking about the business. How is this business going to scale? Because after all, that's what it's all about, right? It's like you're in a startup, you're the first lawyer, you've got to do everything, but gradually it's about paring that back and doing less. Yeah,
I mean, that's definitely something I was going to come on to, and something that Sophie, you mentioned previously. Is there a journey that you have to take the business on, depending on their stage of growth? Because as James said, you need to be keeping up with the pace of growth, but actually at the start you might be doing everything, and then ultimately you want to get to a place that isn't you're doing everything. So how do you actually go about managing that change? Sophie?
Yeah, I think that's true. I actually think that journey probably starts within the legal team as well, particularly a startup where there's kind of more of a fail fast attitude and people aren't afraid to make mistakes, and they're not worried if something's only 70-80% right as long as it's kind of fundamentally there. That's really different to how we're taught to work as lawyers, where we're encouraged to get to 100% in private practice. We're taught that we should be going the extra mile. And I think that sort of journey of, well, firstly, when you get to a startup and having to be a bit more relaxed about things and understand that plates are going to smash and that that's not the end of the world, I think that's a shift in mind frame. And then you go through this process of like getting everyone to come to legal and getting across the business and building your reputation. And then you're too big, so you have to start sending people away and you have to get people going through self-serve processes. And as a team, you have to sort of trust that you've done the training, you've put the processes in place and got the controls, and that ultimately if it goes wrong, you'll help people fix it. And that's what you're there for, as opposed to being a gatekeeper and making sure that a mistake is never made anywhere in the business, because that's just unrealistic. So I think that's quite a journey as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, trying to make it so legal can do everything is very difficult. And Rob, it's interesting what you said, that train the business and say we've actually got this function over here, but what else can you do to make sure that it doesn't end up legal project managing everything, including commercial negotiations? James?
I think it's about enabling good decision making. I think that as a lawyer, we do have a tendency to want to stop things going wrong. Like, I think we're slightly wired that way. And when you're in the house, you will see things that aren't perfect all the time. So it definitely is an experience thing. But in order to ensure those things don't go wrong, ultimately it shouldn't be down to the lawyer to kind of be the gatekeeper. It is ultimately the governance and decision making that should actually stop that, or catch that, or at least understand when risks are being taken, understand what those risks look like, and making active decisions based on those risks. So I think actually it's incumbent upon the senior lawyer to be making sure that those good decisions are made, that the information is being brought to the forums where that information is being surfaced, that risks are being surfaced, and the people making the decisions have the right information at their fingertips. And I think if the lawyers seem to be enabling the business by giving them that information and not standing in the way, not saying we can't, I mean, sometimes there will be things obviously where we say, actually, this is not okay, but that should be the exception, not the rule. But enabling the business to knowingly make those decisions and knowingly take those risks, I think, is our role.
Yeah, it's a big realization point, I think, for an in-house lawyer, that that assuming most people start in private practice, the brand of the firm is perfect legal advice, right? So it's the advice has to be perfect. It can't go out the door without being perfect. You have to kind of leave that at the door when you move in-house, because you are no longer the brand, you're a support function. The brand or the product is something completely different to you, and you are there to enable that. So as long as you're in the room and you understand the risks, you feel like you've presented the best portrait of what those risks are. If the commercial team sit down and say, right, well, fine, we're going to crack on, then it's not rarely is there kind of an avenue for you to say, no, I don't agree, we should not go ahead. It's you're a limb of a wider risk function, and the business is well within its rights to make those decisions. And I think that's the difference in your brand, is that as long as you're seen to facilitate that and they feel comfortable that they're going into any decision they've made with their eyes open, then you've done your job. Yeah,
definitely. I should have said actually at the start that please just drop questions in the Q&A box, because I'll leave a decent amount of time to ask all of those at the end. Something else I want us to talk about, which may have never happened to any of you, so that'd be great if it hasn't, but what happens where trust is eroded or something hasn't quite gone the way you want it to, such that you're experiencing reputational damage? How do you actually rebuild it? Because everything that you do is basically built on trust. So Rob, do you want to start off?
Is that because I smiled?
Yes.
Yeah. I wouldn't say I hasten to. I don't think I've eroded the trust of anyone, but I have got I've got my personal brand quite wrong quite recently. I'm trying to think of how much detail to go into here. I was on a risk committee with several non-exec directors and the CFO who was new to the business, and the CEO. And they asked me a question I wasn't expecting, and I went into Rob the explainer mode. So I talked about it as I would to more junior members of the business, and I forgot to do what James said, which was bring in business impact. So I felt like I gave a very thorough and decent legal answer to the question they had asked, and I knew within 3 minutes that they weren't listening anymore, and it was like classic lawyer, right? He's doing this for himself. And it felt a little bit like at the end, I was like, I knew I hadn't answered that question well. I knew I hadn't pitched it for them. And the problem with non-execs is you only see them twice a year, if that. Through 2020, you didn't see them at all. It was a one-off. And you think, I've balls that up, haven't I? So what do you do about it? Well, you don't do that again. You learn, I guess. It's not the end of the day. It's not the end of the world, but you do realize that, okay, how do I talk to that guy next time I see him? And I'm going to make sure I am hyper drilled down onto the business impact for him. This CFO has been at the business for 6 weeks. I asked for feedback. Feedback's great. It hurts. It stings a little bit. His feedback to me on that was, yeah, it was slightly imprecise, and I think he was being polite because he didn't know me. So you just make sure that the next time you speak to him that you're just laser focused. Okay, This has come up. This is how you solve it. I'm going to go ahead. Let me know if that's the problem. And bit by bit, he might think that, oh, okay, maybe he's not a classic waffly lawyer. But it happens. You can't get these things right all the time. And it's like there's layers of atmosphere. And I joined Funding Circle as a junior lawyer, and you kind of work up, and the first time you sit on a board meeting, it's terrifying. But these non-execs, they sit on 4 boards. They have 16 to 20 board meetings a year. It's fine for them. They're not nervous. You're nervous. They don't have a dry throat. You have a dry throat. And so you just got to work at these things, practice and take feedback, and attend webinars.
Exactly. Thanks everyone who attended. James?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are times when we beat ourselves up, and we probably think we weren't as impactful and as good as we could have been. And I think being lawyers, we probably have a huge inner critic inside of ourselves all the time. I certainly do. But I don't think that necessarily erodes trust. It's just not being as impactful as we want to be, or as others can perhaps need us to be. I think if we're talking about breakdown in trust, usually it's a communication failure internally in the business, and something has happened, but it usually involves people. It usually involves some kind of communication, and the way to repair that is over communicating and getting together and actually just talking it out, and doing that in a very non-ego way, talking openly and being able to acknowledge that perhaps where you've perhaps gone wrong, frankly, and where the communication perhaps has gone awry. So being humble, I think, being humble and ready to say sorry and acknowledge when you've got stuff wrong, and be ready to listen and not judge, and accept that there's two sides to every story, which usually there is.
Yeah, it's quite hard as lawyers, because you have to get everything right. So it is quite hard to then say, oh, actually, I got this wrong. Sophie?
Yeah, I'm going to be really annoying and agree with everything that James and Rob just said. I think actually together those answers are pretty much perfect. I mean, I think there's a lot to be said for lawyers putting their hands up and saying that they've made a mistake. Maybe it's better to do it in the sense of the way I presented this was wrong, rather than my technical advice is wrong, because I think that probably opens less questions. But I think lawyers can be quite intimidating, and so people in the business probably find it helpful that from time to time you're not hitting the mark and you acknowledge that that's the case. And I think that probably helps to build a stronger relationship in the long term. And I think, communication and over communicating when something goes wrong is just critical. And actually, if you've got that communication right at the start, then fixing it when things go wrong is probably a lot easier. If you've got that solid foundation of having open conversations and being able to trust each other to do that, then you can probably work your way through whatever problem comes your way quite quickly. If everything's kind of transactional and you don't have that sort of wider piece to your relationship, then maybe it's a bit harder. So I think there's probably something about having a bit of a human connection with the people you're working with too.
Definitely, that's all great advice. Okay, we touched on this earlier actually, but how do you actually measure whether or not you're doing a good job? What can you provide to the board or the business or whoever to demonstrate that you are being successful and bolstering your reputation? Sophie, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think we could probably be a bit better at self-promoting as lawyers. I think it's something that we're not typically that great at. We tend to be quite humble, and I think the challenge from that is, as we've already said, that often what we do is kind of qualitative and not quantitative. We can't say these are the numbers, these are the stats. I think increasingly with tech, we're able to show some of those numbers, but they probably don't have the same impact as, I signed this multi-million deal or I saved the business this much. And so I think maybe working more on the kind of the risks that we've avoided, the problems that we've solved, and actually calling out what we've done more. We just don't kind of recognize when we've done things. We don't pat ourselves and each other on the back for that, which I think we should do more. I also think that, that there's probably something about having your own KPIs. I mean, we all kind of work in tech environments now. When you look at how they plan and structure their time every quarter, they've got clear key objectives. They've got something that they're working to. Whereas we tend to work to other people's KPIs quite a lot. And I think if we don't have a clear view of that, we don't track our progress, because it's just, whatever fire came through the door and whatever I had to deal with on that day. Yeah. So having a really clear idea of what we're trying to achieve in what time frame, and then reflecting on whether or not we've done it, that helps us to show that we're delivering value and kind of hitting the goals we're aiming for as well.
Yeah, definitely. Rob?
I would say a good technique is to ask again for feedback. So I asked for feedback in my last example when I had a bad experience for like learning, right? But if you and your team know you've done a good job, there's no harm going to the person who benefited and say, by the way, can my team have some feedback? Innocent face. And let them come back to you and say, oh yeah, you guys were great. Like, you're so responsive, you turned that around quickly, you added value. I'd never thought of it like that. And that way, through canvassing feedback for your team, you are sowing that seed of, oh yeah, you realize how much value we add. Okay, fine, thank you for that lovely feedback. We'll take that away, and so on and so on. And if you do that repeatedly, that it kind of builds this kind of kernel in these people's minds, and then that evolves and that evolves and that evolves, and all of a sudden you have a reputation for being an incredibly helpful team because people start to talk about it. So yeah, don't just say feedback for when you've done bad. Go get good feedback as well, and make that a kind of part of the loop of any piece of work that you do. Get feedback.
James?
Yeah, it's interesting when we talk about this, and sometimes lawyers tend to think, oh, they're metrics. I know, I will report on how many contracts we've reviewed and how long they take and how many liability clauses we've been able to reduce. Like people in the business do not care about this stuff. Like, they don't care how many contracts you've looked at. That's your job. Get on with it, right? So what I think, going back to Sophie's point, I think the thing that I think sets you apart is your ability to define goals that are things that you're doing as a function, which are not reactive to the work that's being put in front of you by the business. So what are the things that you're doing to actually move the business forward and improve upon your legal controls, tooling, whatever it is, so that you do things better as a function, and then you can report on those. These are the deliverables that we've achieved month or quarter on quarter outside of our day job. And I think that's where you can demonstrate some. I mean, it's not usually data driven. It's not usually necessarily metrics, but you can show that you've made change. You've actually made improvement.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. All right, guys, thank you very much. We've got about 10 minutes left, so I'm going to see what questions we have. So please feel free to add more in. Okay. How do you go about setting legal OKRs? It's a good one. Rob?
Okay, you're going to get your wish, Roisin. I don't bother with them. I just don't bother with them. They're pointless. James said it, the business don't care. Why report against stuff the business doesn't care about? So I don't care. They don't care how many contracts they've done. I don't know how many contracts my team have done. I don't know how many data breaches we've had. My InfoSec risk team do, because they report that into. That was a bad example. Any kind of like positive, qualitative OKRs, I don't bother with. Someone's got to put a gun to my head and tell me to do OKRs. I hate them. They're for other parts of the business, not me. Oh,
interesting. Okay.
Sorry.
No, great.
Not sorry.
James?
Not sorry.
Yeah, not sorry. James?
Well, I'm gonna follow that theme. I mean, I think there's
no, we need some disagreement.
A lot of pressure on legal to sort of be and act like the rest of the business. And actually, these teams, finance have all these OKRs and product have these OKRs. So we've got to kind of come up with ours and make it look like we're really metrics focused and data driven. Like, it's just not the same. It's not the same. And as I said earlier, the types of data that we can come up with is just not interesting for the business. So I completely just say no, resist.
That to me, Sophie, I'll come to you in a second, but that to me sounds like it might harm your reputation.
Yeah, probably.
Sophie?
I'm gonna disagree. I actually think I totally agree with you on the point that tracking numbers, tracking contracts, that kind of thing is not. I just don't think it has any value. It doesn't show the impact that we're having because we're expected to kind of churn through that stuff. But I think having your goals of the team, having your strategy and your objectives of the team, and having that sort of memorialized in a way that you can then track against it, it's quite good for accountability for the team, and also it sort of gives our role a bit of importance to the business, because what you can often find is everyone else's thing is the most important thing that's happening, and it's got to be done immediately, and it's the top of everyone's list, and there's an exec somewhere breathing down their neck and it has to happen. And if you don't have anything to counter with, you just never get to your own stuff. So I quite like having an idea within the team of like what we're trying to achieve and how our objectives sit for a particular quarter, not in terms of data, not in terms of what we're trying to get through, but so that you can kind of counter and say, well, that's nice, tell me why this is more important than this thing I've got to do, which is going to, reduce this area of risk, or which is going to improve the lives of the people in this function. Or because we get that when we ask for people to make changes for us, can you make this tweak to the product because it will help with compliance, or tell me how I'm going to prioritize this against this, and why should I take this out of the stack. And so I think that that's quite helpful for us to have those arguments.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Anything to add?
I'd say Sophie's the voice of reason there. That's very true. I think it's good to have, say, for example, we're going to launch a new customer product. We know that in 6 months' time, we're going to do that. So this quarter, my team has to get T's and C's set up for that. There's no ifs, buts, or maybe. It has to get done. So that's a goal. And if someone comes in with a tweak here, tweak there, if you look at this NDA here, can you look at this contract here? having that goal they can turn around and say, I'm sorry, I've got to do this is more important, and having the business kind of ratify those things are good. Yeah, like I guess OKRs, KPIs, all that stuff, there are levels to it all, aren't there? Sophie's right.
Yeah, we didn't even manage to disagree then.
I do agree.
I know, I kind of agree with that. I agree with what you said.
I just think that a lot of what we do is actually interwoven with what the business is doing, and so sometimes it is difficult to kind of come up with things which are independent of what the business is doing. Like these are our kind of goals within our function. That's much tougher. And at the end of the day, when it's really super busy, all that stuff that you've got within your own team to do just gets pushed aside just to react to the business. So my experience with OKRs is that you get to the end of the quarter and you've only achieved 50% of them, if that, because actually you've been too busy reacting to all of the needs of the business, but prioritizing them first. You're probably under-resourced, and then you look bad. Well, it's not because you weren't working hard and actually solving the problems of the business. You absolutely were doing those things. In fact, you were prioritizing those things over the things that were perhaps kind of second-order problems.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting, Sophie, that point, to be sort of combative, if you like, because you do find that legal teams often spend their life just responding to questions on Slack, and it's just not a strategic way to spend your time. That was actually the only question. So if nobody has any other questions, then we can wrap up a bit early. Thank you, everybody, for attending, and thank you to the panelists. That was excellent. We've had some thank yous as well. Great. Well, I'll see you all soon.
Thanks.
Thank you
very much. Bye.